The moment I saw her face when my husband introduced me as his fiancé, I should have known. But I didn't. I was too busy looking at the ring on my finger, too busy imagining Sunday dinners and family holidays, too busy believing that love was enough to bridge any distance. Her name was Patricia. She had my husband's eyes, that same sharp blue, that same way of tilting her head when she was studying you. But when my husband's gaze was warm, hers was calculating. She looked at me the way a jeweler looks at a stone, trying to decide if it was worth anything. "Welcome to the family," she'd said that day, and she'd smiled, but the smile didn't reach those blue eyes. It was a smile that said, "We'll see how long you last." 10 years later, I understood what that smile meant. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning and to when I was still naive enough to believe that marrying into a family meant you actually belonged there. My husband's name is David. We met at a bookstore coffee shop in November, both reaching for the last copy of the same novel. He let me have it. 3 weeks later, he showed up at my apartment with his own copy, asking if I wanted to discuss it over dinner. That's the kind of man he is, thoughtful, patient, the kind who remembers how you take your coffee and the names of all your friends. When he proposed, it was in that same bookstore, at the same coffee counter, with a simple gold ring and simpler words. "I want to build a life with you. Will you let me?" I said yes before he even finished the sentence. His family lived about 2 hours away, in a sprawling Victorian house on the edge of town. His father, William, was a retired accountant, quiet, kind, the kind of man who fixed things around the house without being asked. His mother, Patricia, had been a business consultant before retirement. She ran the family the way she'd probably run her consulting firm, with structure, efficiency, and an iron grip beneath the velvet glove. David had a younger sister, Margaret, who was warm and funny and immediately took me under her wing. She worked in publishing and seemed to genuinely like me, which helped. But even with Margaret on my side, I could feel Patricia's resistance like a cold draft in an otherwise warm house. "She's just protective of David," Margaret would whisper to me after family dinners. Noticing the way Patricia would watch us interact, noticing the tight smile when David held my hand. Give her time, she'll warm up. I wanted to believe that. I really did. The first year of marriage was happy. David and I bought a small house with a garden that needed work. We spent weekends painting walls and planting flowers. My job as a graphic designer kept me busy, and David's work as an architect meant we were often both absorbed in our own projects. But we had that easy companionship, the kind where silence feels like a conversation. We visited his parents every other Sunday for dinner. Patricia would cook elaborate meals, and I would bring wine or dessert, trying to find the right gift that would somehow unlock her approval. But Patricia had a way of receiving these offerings that made them feel inadequate. She'd glance at the wine, nod, place it on the counter without comment. She'd taste the dessert, pause meaningfully, then say something like, "Interesting choice," in a tone that suggested it was anything but. David never seemed to notice. Or maybe he noticed and had learned long ago not to acknowledge it. That's a skill people develop in difficult families, the ability to let cruelty wash over them without comment, without confrontation. William, on the other hand, was consistently kind. He'd ask about my work, listen to my answers, remember details from previous conversations. Once he pulled me aside after dinner and said, "Don't mind Patricia. She's afraid of change. It's not about you." I'd wanted to believe that too. But I'd begun to suspect it was precisely about me, about the fact that I represented a shift in the family dynamics, a claim on David's time and attention that Patricia wasn't ready to relinquish. Margaret confirmed this one afternoon over coffee. "My mother has always needed to be the center of everything," she said carefully, stirring her latte. David was her favorite, the golden child. When he was single, he was available for advice, for help, for her projects. Now, Margaret trailed off, but the implication was clear. Now he had me. Still, I told myself it would improve. Time heals, bridges build, people surprise you. I was young enough to believe that persistence and kindness could overcome anything. I was naive, enough to believe that love was a shield against betrayal. The first clue came on a Tuesday morning in March. David had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, and I was innocently searching for the password to our home Wi-Fi, which had been acting up. As I moved the cursor, a document title caught my eye. Mom's medical file. I shouldn't have looked. I knew, even as my hand moved the mouse, that I was crossing a boundary. But something in me, some instinct that I'd learned to trust over the years, made me open it anyway. It was a folder. Inside were scans of medical records, financial documents, and something labeled estate plan, confidential. I closed it immediately. I wasn't supposed to see that. David hadn't shown it to me intentionally, but the damage was done. I'd seen enough to know that something about his mother's finances was unusual enough that he'd created a hidden folder for it. I didn't mention it to David. That was my first mistake. 2 weeks later, David came home from work with the kind of tension in his shoulders that meant something was wrong. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Nothing elaborate, just pasta and a simple sauce, when he set his briefcase down with more force than necessary. "My mother called me," he said. He didn't kiss me hello. He didn't ask about my day. "She's accusing you of stealing from her." I remember the wooden spoon going slack in my hand. The sauce continued to bubble on the stove, and for a moment, the only sound in the kitchen was that gentle, rhythmic boiling. "What?" I turned to face him. "Stealing what?" "She says money is missing from a joint account she shares with my father. She's saying that you took it when you were at the house last Sunday." David's voice was flat, carefully controlled in that way it got when he was deeply upset. "She's threatening to go to the police." I stood there, my mind scrambling. Last Sunday, we had dinner at Patricia's house, the usual affair. David's father, William, had been ill with the flu, so we'd spent most of the evening with Patricia in the living room, watching an old movie. I'd used the bathroom once, briefly. I'd never been near any accounts or any money. "That's insane," I said, and I heard the tremor in my own voice. "David, I didn't take anything." "Why would I take money from your mother?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I know you didn't. I told her that. But she's adamant. She says she noticed it missing on Monday morning. She's been keeping records." He pulled out his phone, showed me a text from Patricia. "I have documentation of the missing funds. I'm going to have to involve authorities if this continues." I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an accusation. And more than that, and this was an opportunity. Patricia had been waiting for a reason to turn David against me, and now she believed she had one. "We should go talk to her," I said. "In person. We can clear this up." David was quiet for a long moment. "I already did." I asked her if she was sure. "I told her about your schedule, about the fact that you were with me the entire time. She said..." He paused, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. "She said that you're clever, that you've been planning this, that she's never trusted you, and now she has proof." The accusation hung between us like smoke. Over the next few days, the situation escalated. Patricia sent David a series of messages detailing the missing amount, $5,000. She included screenshots of her account, bank statements, and calculations. She suggested that I must have somehow gained access to her information, that I'd been planning this all along. She questioned how we could afford our house, our car, our lifestyle. She implied that maybe I'd been stealing from her all along and David simply hadn't noticed. David defended me. He told her it was impossible, but I could see the doubt beginning to creep in at the edges. Not doubt in me, exactly, but doubt in his certainty. Questions he couldn't quite suppress. Why would his mother make such a serious accusation if she wasn't sure? Why would she risk her relationship with her son over a lie? William, interestingly, stayed quiet. Margaret called me privately and said, "This is crazy. My mother is insane. Don't let her do this to you." But even Margaret seemed shaken, as if the accusation itself, once spoken aloud, had taken on a life of its own. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake next to David, listening to him breathe, feeling the distance between us grow wider with each passing night. He still loved me, I could feel that. But love, I was learning, could coexist with doubt. They could occupy the same space, warring with each other in the dark. At work, I couldn't concentrate. My boss asked if everything was okay. I said yes, but my hands shook when I held my stylus. I felt watched, judged, guilty of something I hadn't done. That's the insidious thing about false accusations. They make you question yourself. They make you start to wonder if maybe you did something you don't remember, if maybe you're capable of something you didn't think you were. One night, about 2 weeks into this nightmare, I finally broke down. David and I were in bed, both pretending to sleep, when I rolled over and said, "I didn't do this. I need you to believe me." I need you to actually believe me, not just say the words. He was quiet for so long that I thought he might not answer. Then he said, I do believe you, but I don't know how to fix this. My mother won't back down. She's convinced herself that you're guilty, and nothing I say changes her mind. And my father? He trailed off. What about your father? He's been acting strange, quiet. I think he might actually believe her, or at least he's afraid to contradict her. Their marriage is complicated, and he doesn't like conflict. I absorbed this information. William, who had always been kind to me, might believe I was a thief. The thought made me feel hollowed out. That night, after David fell asleep, I got out of bed and went to the living room. I opened my laptop and did something I'd been resisting for weeks. I started digging. It began as a simple Google search, Patricia Chen, financial advisor. Patricia had mentioned her consulting work over dinner once or twice, always vaguely. I'd never paid much attention. But now I wanted to know more about her, wanted to understand who she really was beneath the tight smile and the cold blue eyes. What I found was interesting. Patricia had worked for a firm called Sterling Consulting Group for 15 years, specializing in wealth management and estate planning. She'd left about 7 years ago, right around the time she'd retired. The firm's website listed her as a specialist in inheritance law and financial arrangements. I sat back from my laptop. Patricia wasn't just some retired businesswoman. She was someone who understood money, who understood how to move it, how to hide it, how to make it disappear. It was 3 in the morning when I opened the file folder on David's laptop again, the one I'd glimpsed weeks ago. My hands were shaking as I navigated through it. Medical files, pharmacy records, insurance documents. And then, buried deeper, I found something else. A folder labeled Estate Plan, updated 2024. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. A will, updated recently, and a separate file. Hidden account information. My breath caught in my throat as I began to read. The document was dated 6 months ago. It was a letter from William to David, written in his careful, precise handwriting, and then scanned into the computer. My hands trembled as I read it. David, I'm writing this because I need you to know the truth, and I'm running out of time to tell you in person. The doctors say my heart is weaker than we thought. I don't know how much longer I have, so I'm putting this down in writing. Your mother has hidden a significant inheritance from my side of the family. My uncle Albert passed away 15 years ago and left his estate to be divided among his nieces and nephews. The total amount was substantial, approximately $200,000. Your mother was the executor of that estate. She never told me the full amount. She told me it was $50,000, and she said she was investing it for our future. Over the years, I asked about it, but she became evasive, angry even. She said it was her responsibility as executor, that I should trust her judgment. I did trust her for many years. Last month, I found old bank statements in a box she'd hidden in the garage. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for paint thinner. What I found instead was proof that the money exists. All of it. In an account in her name alone, I confronted her about it. She told me it was none of my business, that the money was earmarked for something important, something she'd been planning for years. When I asked what, she refused to answer. We had the worst fight we've had in decades. She told me if I mentioned it to anyone, she would make my life very difficult. But I can't let this go to my grave, David. You and your sister deserve to know that your mother has been lying to us. You deserve to know what she's capable of. I'm enclosing the account numbers and the documentation I found. If anything happens to me, you need to know where to look. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you this in person. Dad, the letter went on to list account numbers, routing information, and the name of the bank where the money was held. My eyes scanned over the details, my mind struggling to process what I was reading. Patricia hadn't accused me of stealing $5,000 because I'd actually taken it. She'd accused me because she needed a distraction. William must have shown David this letter at some point. That's why David had the file on his laptop. And Patricia, realizing that the truth was about to come out, had made a preemptive strike. She'd created a false accusation against me to muddy the waters, to create chaos and division in the family before David could investigate her finances. It was brilliant, in a terrible way. It was the kind of strategic maneuvering that only someone with her background would think to execute. I sat in the darkness of our living room, the glow of the laptop screen making everything else seem shadowed and unreal. My first instinct was to wake David up and show him what I'd found. But something stopped me, a small voice that whispered, "Not yet. You need to understand the full picture first." For the next hour, I methodically went through every document in that folder. I found the bank statements William had mentioned, the proof of the hidden account, the investment records showing that Patricia had been actively managing the money, moving it between accounts, making purchases, building wealth in secret. I found something else too, a document titled Disbursement Plan. It detailed how Patricia intended to use the money: a vacation home in Cabo San Lucas, art acquisitions, a trust fund for a charity organization that, upon further research, turned out to be run by Patricia's best friend from college. She wasn't stealing the money for practical reasons. She was stealing it for lifestyle, for luxury, for control. I made copies of everything. I downloaded files to a secure cloud storage. I was methodical and careful, the way someone is when they're handling evidence. By the time the sun came up, I knew everything Patricia had done, and I knew exactly what it meant. When David woke up and found me in the kitchen, I was on my second cup of coffee, and my mind was working through scenarios like a chess player thinking several moves ahead. "We need to talk," I said. He came and sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I showed him what I'd found. I explained about William's letter, about the hidden account, about Patricia's lie. I watched his face as the reality of his mother's deception settled over him like ash. "She lied to me," he said quietly. Not a question. A statement of fact he was trying to absorb. She did more than that. "She accused me of distracting you from the truth." David stood up and walked to the window. He stood there for a long time, his hands braced against the frame, his shoulders rigid with tension. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked. I'd been thinking about this since 3 a.m. I'd been turning it over in my mind like a stone, looking at it from every angle. "I want to confront her," I said. "But not the way she'd expect. I want her to understand what she's done, and I want your father to know that we know the truth. And then? And then we let the law handle it. If William wants to pursue this, it's his inheritance to reclaim. But first, I want her to face what she's done." David turned back to look at me. In his eyes, I saw something shift. Not just anger at his mother's betrayal, but a kind of grim determination. He loved me enough to choose me. But more than that, he loved his father enough to fight for him. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it. We called William first." David told him that we knew about the letter, about the accounts, about everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and then William began to cry. Quiet, relieved tears. He'd been carrying this burden alone for so long. "I was going to tell you properly," William said. "I was waiting for the right moment, but then Patricia started this awful business about the money, and I didn't know what to do." "We're going to take care of it," David promised. Margaret was next. When David told her what we'd discovered, she was shocked but not entirely surprised. "I always knew something was off with her," Margaret said, "but I never imagined it was something like this." We set up a family meeting for the following Sunday. David called Patricia and said we needed to discuss some financial matters regarding William's estate. He didn't mention that we knew the truth. He simply requested that everyone be present. Patricia agreed, though I could hear the wariness in her voice when David told me about the call. That week felt suspended in time. David went to work, I went to work, but we were both moving through our days in a kind of trance, waiting for Sunday to arrive. On Friday night, David held me in bed and said, "Thank you for not believing her. Thank you for digging deeper. I knew you," I said. "I knew you wouldn't marry someone capable of stealing from your family." "It wasn't about that," he said quietly. "I would have believed you even if it seemed like you might have done it. That's what marriage is supposed to be. Someone who believes in you even when the evidence looks bad." I wanted to say something profound in response, but instead I just held him tighter and let the darkness of the room hold us both. Sunday arrived cold and gray. The drive to his parents' house felt longer than usual. David's hands were tight on the steering wheel, and I could see the muscle in his jaw working as he clenched and unclenched his teeth. When we arrived, Margaret was already there, sitting in the living room with William. Patricia was in the kitchen, pointedly not greeting us when we entered. She was wearing an expensive sweater I'd never seen before, probably purchased with stolen money, and her face had that tight, controlled expression that meant she was furious about something. "Well?" Patricia said. finally entering the living room where we were all gathered. This is quite the dramatic summons. What's so urgent that it couldn't wait for our regular Sunday dinner? David looked at William, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. We need to talk about the money, David said. The inheritance from Uncle Albert. Patricia's face went very still. I don't know what you're talking about. The $200,000, David continued, his voice steady and calm. The money you told Dad was $50,000. The money you've been hiding in a secret account. For a moment, Patricia didn't move. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. This is absurd. I don't have to sit here and listen to these accusations. She stood to leave, but William spoke up, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. Patricia, I found the statements. I know everything. She turned to face him, and I saw something flash across her face. Not shame, not remorse, but fury. Pure, unadulterated fury that someone had discovered her secret. You had no right to go through my things, she said coldly. They were my inheritance, William replied. Money that belonged to my family. Money you were supposed to manage honestly. I was managing it, Patricia snapped. I was managing it better than you ever could. I was investing it, growing it, building something with it instead of letting it sit in some boring account earning nothing. It wasn't yours to manage that way, Margaret said quietly. Mom, you stole from Dad. You stole from the family. Patricia's eyes flashed to Margaret with venom. You don't understand. None of you understand what it's like to have vision, to see potential, to want more than just mediocrity. So you lied, I said. It was the first time I'd spoken since we arrived. Patricia's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. You lied to your husband for 15 years, and when you realized he'd found out, you tried to frame me for stealing to create a distraction. I never... Patricia started. But David cut her off. We have the documents, Mom. We have copies of everything. The account numbers, the transfer records, the disbursement plan. We know about the vacation home, the art collection, all of it. Patricia sat down slowly as if her legs had given out. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the way she'd looked at me across the dinner table. The way she'd whispered accusations to David. The way she'd tried to destroy my marriage to cover her own crimes. The pity evaporated. The silence that followed David's words was absolute. Patricia sat in her expensive armchair, her hands folded in her lap, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. Not physically, she was the same woman she'd always been. But something in her had diminished. Some invisible armor that had been holding her up had cracked. What do you want? She asked finally. Her voice was different now. No longer sharp, no longer commanding. Just tired, the truth, William said. I want you to tell us why. Help me understand how you could do this. Patricia's laugh was bitter. You want to understand? Fine, I'll tell you why. Because for 40 years, I've been the one managing everything. I've been the one making decisions, building things, creating stability. And what did I get for it? A husband who doesn't appreciate me, children who don't respect me, a life that feels small and constrained. So you stole, Margaret said, not unkindly, just stating facts. I invested, Patricia corrected, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. I was building something, a future where I didn't have to depend on anyone, where I had choices. You had choices, I said quietly. You could have talked to your husband about the money. You could have been honest about wanting more. Instead, you lied. Patricia's eyes met mine, and for just a moment I saw something raw in them, a glimpse of the frightened woman beneath all the control and manipulation. And now what? She asked. Are you going to call the police? Are you going to humiliate me publicly? David and I exchanged a glance. We hadn't discussed this part, not explicitly. We'd been so focused on the confrontation that we hadn't talked about what came after. William spoke before we could. I'm going to consult with a lawyer. Depending on what they advise, I may pursue civil action to recover the money. As for criminal charges... He paused, and I could see the conflict on his face. He was a good man, and pressing criminal charges against his wife of 40 years was clearly causing him real pain. I haven't decided yet. But there's something else, David said, and I recognized the tone in his voice. The same careful tone he used when he was about to say something important. Mom, you accused my wife of stealing. You lied to me. You tried to turn me against her. That's not something I can just move past. Patricia flinched as if he'd struck her. I'm going to need time, David continued. I'm going to need you to understand what you did and why it was wrong. And until you can genuinely apologize, not defend yourself, not make excuses, but actually apologize, I'm going to need some distance from you. David, Patricia started, but he held up his hand. I love you, he said, and his voice cracked slightly with emotion. You're my mother, but right now I can't be around you. I can't trust you, and I need to protect my wife and my marriage. Patricia's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse flicker across her features. But it was too late for that to change anything. The damage was done. We left an hour later. The conversation had continued in circles, Patricia alternating between denial and rationalization, William growing quieter as the reality of his wife's betrayal continued to settle over him, Margaret trying to mediate and ultimately giving up. As we drove home, David didn't speak. His hands were tight on the wheel, his jaw clenched. I reached over and placed my hand on his leg, and after a moment he covered it with his own. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what? You didn't do anything wrong. For doubting you. For even considering for even a moment that you might have... You didn't, I interrupted gently. You believed me when it mattered. You chose us. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, what you did. Digging through those files, finding the evidence, planning the confrontation the way you did. That was smart. That was brave. I thought about this. I thought about the 3 mornings when I decided to investigate. The methodical way I'd gathered evidence. The patience with which I'd waited for the right moment to act. I was angry, I said honestly. She accused me of stealing, and I wanted to prove her wrong. But more than that, I wanted her to understand what she'd done. Not just to me, but to your father. To your family, did you? David asked. Do you think she understands? I considered this question carefully. I think she's beginning to. But understanding and accepting are 2 different things. She might spend years trying to rationalize what she did, trying to convince herself that she was the victim in this situation. And if she does, then that's her choice. And it's your choice how much you want to engage with that. The next week was chaos in the family. William consulted with a lawyer and learned that he likely had a strong civil case. Patricia, panicked and defensive, hired her own lawyer, which only made things more adversarial. Margaret was caught in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with both her parents while also supporting David and me. But something shifted in my relationship with David during that time. We'd been tested in a way that most couples aren't, and we'd come through it stronger. He'd chosen to believe me over his own mother. I'd chosen to fight for our marriage rather than just accept the accusations. We'd chosen each other. 2 weeks after the family meeting, I received a phone call. It was William. He asked if David and I could meet him for lunch the following Saturday, without Patricia. We agreed, though I was nervous about what he might want to discuss. When we arrived at the restaurant, William was already there, sitting in a quiet corner booth. He looked older than he had just weeks before. The stress and betrayal had aged him visibly. But his eyes were clear, and there was a kind of determination in his expression. I wanted to thank you, he said after we'd ordered. He was looking directly at me. For what you did. For finding the truth. For protecting David. I was protecting myself, I said honestly. I didn't want to be accused of something I didn't do. I know. But you did more than that. You cared enough about the truth to dig for it. Most people wouldn't have bothered. How is she? David asked carefully. Patricia is... William paused, choosing his words. Patricia is struggling. She's angry at me for consulting with the lawyer. She's angry at you, he gestured to David, for taking sides against her. And she's convinced herself that you, he looked at me again, deliberately framed her somehow, that this is all part of some elaborate plan. Of course she is, I said quietly. The reason I wanted to meet with you is because I've made a decision, William continued. I'm going to pursue the civil claim. I'm going to recover as much of that money as I can. But I'm also going to do something else. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. I've revised my will. I've divided my estate equally between David and Margaret, as I always intended. But I've also set aside a specific amount from the recovered inheritance funds. That amount is designated for you, he said to me, to be held in trust, to be used as you see fit. I stared at the folder. William, you don't have to do that. I want to, he said firmly. You've been treated unfairly. You've been accused and maligned. You deserve something tangible that says, I believe you. I support you. I value you as part of this family. David reached over and squeezed my hand. I could feel his eyes on me, watching my reaction. Thank you, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. There's one more thing, William said. He pulled out another document. This is a letter I've written to Patricia. I'm not going to send it yet. I want you to read it first, both of you. I want to know if you think I should send it. He handed the letter to David, who unfolded it carefully. As he read, his eyes moved back and forth, and I watched his expression shift from sadness to something that looked like peace. When he finished, he handed it to me. The letter was written in William's careful handwriting, addressed to Patricia. It wasn't angry or accusatory. Instead, it was sad. The sadness of a man who had realized that the woman he'd built a life with had been living a double life all along. He wrote about his disappointment, his hurt, his sense of betrayal. But he also wrote about his willingness to try to move forward, on one condition, that Patricia genuinely commit to honesty and transparency going forward. If you cannot do this, he'd written, then I think it may be time for us to separate. I cannot continue to live with someone I cannot trust. I deserve better than that. And frankly, so do you. It was a powerful letter, not a threat, but a boundary. A statement of what William would and would not tolerate. Send it, I said, handing the letter back to William. Send it with love, but send it with truth. William nodded, and I could see relief wash over his face as if he'd been waiting for permission to do what he knew was right. Over the following months, the situation with Patricia played out in ways I never could have predicted. She received William's letter and, instead of responding to it with the kind of reflection he'd hoped for, she responded with anger. She accused him of being manipulated by David and me. She refused to acknowledge that her actions had been wrong, instead framing herself as a victim of a conspiracy against her. William, with quiet dignity, filed for separation. It was amicable in the legal sense. There were no screaming matches, no custody battles. But it was final. He moved into a small apartment across town, and Patricia remained in the Victorian house, rattling around in rooms she'd decorated with money that no longer belonged to her. David maintained limited contact with his mother. He saw her on holidays, spoke to her occasionally on the phone, but there was a distance that would never fully close. Patricia, to her credit, eventually apologized to me, though it was a grudging apology, delivered through clenched teeth, and I never quite believed it was genuine. But what mattered was that David and I emerged from the experience stronger. And William, while heartbroken, found a kind of peace. He started seeing a therapist. He began taking painting classes, something he'd always wanted to do but never had time for. He built a new life, a quieter life, but one that was entirely his own. A year after the confrontation, something unexpected happened. David received a call from Patricia's lawyer. She wanted to sell the house, the Victorian property that had been in the family for 20 years. She was downsizing, the lawyer explained, moving into a smaller condo. But before she sold it, she wanted David to have the first opportunity to purchase it. It was an olive branch, though a strange one. The house held complicated memories for both of us now. I'd spent countless Sunday dinners in that living room, feeling the weight of Patricia's disapproval. I'd walked through those halls as an outsider, someone Patricia had done everything in her power to exclude. But David loved that house. I could see it in his face when we drove past it now. He loved it not because of Patricia, but despite her. He loved it because his father had cared for it, because he had memories there that predated his mother's toxicity. What do you think? David asked me one evening as we sat on our back porch, looking out at the small garden we'd been cultivating. Should we make an offer? I thought about Patricia rattling around in those rooms. I thought about the money she'd stolen, the lies she'd told, the way she'd tried to destroy me. I thought about William, living alone in his small apartment, painting on weekends, and then I had an idea. Yes, I said. Let's buy it. But not for us. David turned to look at me, confused. I want to give it to your father, I said. As a gift. He built that house, David. He maintained it. He poured his life into it. And then your mother stole it from him, in a way. Stole his peace of mind, his sense of home. I want to give it back to him. David stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, That's incredible. But it's a huge investment. Are you sure? I was sure. The trust fund that William had set aside for me, the money that came from the recovered inheritance, that was meant for exactly this kind of thing. William had given me something to restore my sense of belonging, and now I could do the same for him. We made an offer on the house. Patricia, desperate for liquidity to support her new lifestyle, accepted quickly. The process took 3 months. Inspections, appraisals, paperwork. During that time, I didn't tell William what we were doing. David wanted to surprise him. On the day we closed on the house, David called his father and asked if he wanted to take a drive. William, unsuspecting, agreed. We picked him up at his apartment, and instead of heading to the scenic overlook where we usually went, David drove toward the old neighborhood. Where are we going? William asked as we turned onto the familiar street. You'll see, David said. When William saw the Victorian house, his face went very still. He didn't say anything as David pulled into the driveway. He just stared at it, his hands gripping his lap. Dad, David said gently, we have something to tell you. We told him everything, how I'd found the documents, how we'd pieced together the truth, how I'd used the trust fund to purchase the house. We told him that it was his now, free and clear, no strings attached, that he could live there or rent it out or do whatever he wanted with it. But it was his, William cried. I'd never seen him cry before, and it broke my heart and healed it at the same time. He cried for the years of betrayal, for the marriage that had shattered, for the trust that had been broken. But he also cried, I think, because we, had believed that he deserved to have something good come from all the pain. I don't know what to say, he said finally, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Say you'll be happy here, I said. Say you'll make new memories in this place, memories that are just yours. And he did. William moved back into the house 3 months later. He painted the walls soft colors. He planted a new garden, different from Patricia's formal designs. This one was wild and varied, full of flowers that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. He set up a studio in one of the upstairs bedrooms where he spent hours working on his paintings. The neighborhood started to see him differently. Instead of the quiet, disapproving woman who'd lived there before, there was now a warm man who waved at his neighbors, who hosted small dinner parties, who seemed genuinely happy. The day William invited us over for dinner in the house, I felt something shift in me. I walked through those hallways that had once felt cold and judgmental, and they felt warm now. They felt like home, not because of the architecture or the furniture, but because of the love that filled them. Patricia, when she learned what had happened, was furious. David reported that she'd called him screaming, accusing him of deliberately humiliating her, of rewarding me for my manipulation, of choosing his father over her. He listened to her rant, and then he said something that I think finally reached her. Mom, I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it because Dad deserves to be happy. And honestly, you deserve to be happy too. But you're not going to find happiness by being angry at us. You're only going to find it if you accept what you did and work to change. Patricia hung up on him. But something in David's words must have landed, because she never called back to continue the argument. Over the next year, we gradually heard less from Patricia. She was living her life in the condo, decorating it with the art she'd purchased with stolen money. From what Margaret told us, she'd started seeing a therapist. Not because she'd had some sudden moment of clarity, but because her new social circle expected it, and she wanted to seem sophisticated and introspective. Whether she was genuinely working on herself or just going through the motions, I didn't know. And eventually, I realized that I didn't need to know. Her healing or her continued bitterness wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was to my marriage, to my own life, and to supporting the people who had shown me kindness. William and David reconciled in a way that felt deeper than before. They spent Saturday mornings together now, working on the house, fixing things, planting things, building things. They talked about David's childhood, about things they'd never discussed before. William told David stories about his own father, about the traditions he'd wanted to pass down. And David listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't been able to when Patricia was orchestrating every family gathering. Margaret and I became closer, too. She'd been caught in the middle of her family's drama, and she appreciated that David and I had handled it with grace instead of bitterness. We started having lunch together regularly, just the two of us. We became genuine friends, not just in-laws bound by obligation. And me? I learned something that year that I think I'd always suspected, but never fully accepted. That my worth wasn't determined by anyone else's approval. Patricia's accusations hadn't stuck because they weren't true, but also because I'd had the courage to investigate them, to fight back, to demand justice. I'd come into this marriage hoping to belong to David's family, and in a strange way, I had achieved that. Not through Patricia's acceptance, but through my own strength. I'd proven that I was worthy of being part of this family, not through compliance or people-pleasing, but through integrity and love. The inheritance money that Patricia had stolen, that William had recovered, most of it went to charitable causes. William established a scholarship fund in Albert's name, helping young people from underprivileged backgrounds attend college. He donated to a women's shelter, to a mental health clinic, to organizations that aligned with his values. The money that had been hidden, that had caused so much pain and betrayal, was transformed into something that helped people. There was a poetry to that, I thought. There was a kind of redemption, even if Patricia herself never experienced it. 2 years after the confrontation, David and I renewed our vows. We didn't do it in a church or with a big ceremony. Instead, we stood in William's garden, surrounded by butterflies and blooming flowers, with Margaret as our witness and William officiating in his gentle, thoughtful way. "I want to renew these vows," David said, looking directly at me, "because you've shown me what real love looks like. Not the kind that asks you to pretend or to accept lies or to make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. But the kind that fights for truth, that stands up for what's right, that chooses you again and again, no matter what." And when it was my turn, I said, "I renew these vows because you believed me when it would have been easier not to. Because you chose me over the comfort of not having conflict. Because you showed me that real family is built on honesty, not obligation." William cried again that day, happy tears this time. Margaret cheered. And I felt, for the first time since I'd met David, that I truly belonged. And that's where my story ends, but maybe it's where yours begins. You see, what I've learned is that family isn't something you're just given. It's something you build, moment by moment, choice by choice. It's built on the foundation of people who choose to believe you, who choose to fight for you, who choose truth even when it's messy and painful. Patricia taught me something too, though I'm not sure she meant to. She taught me that control masquerading as protection is still just control. That lies, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually crumble. And that the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who stand beside you when everything is falling apart. I gave Patricia the one thing she cared about most. I gave her the truth. And I gave it to her without cruelty, without revenge, just with the quiet certainty that she needed to know what she'd done. The rest was up to her. So here's my question. For you, if you were in my position, would you have dug for the truth? Would you have fought back? Or would you have accepted the accusation and let it poison your marriage? And if you had discovered what I discovered, would you have shown mercy? Or would you have wanted justice? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. Thank you for listening to me.